Hello, and welcome to Crackling Tales. I'm Ken Bearden. We're here again in the beautiful rooms of the Bacon District Memorial Library to celebrate some great stories. It's October, so that means Halloween, and this week we have a very special all-poetry edition. We're going to move from some very silly stuff to some very scary stuff. I hope you'll enjoy it. Our first story actually has a different theme. It's a little bit of a Christmas story, but it's scary enough to count for Halloween. It is called The Boy Who Laughed at Santa Claus by Ogden Nash. In Baltimore, there lived a boy. He wasn't anybody's joy. Although his name was Jabez Dawes, his character was full of flaws. In school, he never led his classes. He hid old ladies' reading glasses. His mouth was open when he chewed, and elbows to the table glued. He stole the milk of hungry kittens, and walked through doors marked no admittance. He said he acted thus because there wasn't any Santa Claus. Another trick that tickled Jabez was crying boo at little babies. He brushed his teeth, they said in town, sideways instead of up and down. Yet people pardoned every sin and viewed his antics with a grin, till they were told by Jabez Dawes, there isn't any Santa Claus. Deploring how he did behave, his parents swiftly sought their grave. They hurried through the portals pearly, and Jabez left the funeral early. Like whooping cough from child to child, he sped to spread the rumor wild, sure as my name is Jabez Dawes, there isn't any Santa Claus. Slunk like a weasel or a martin through nursery and kindergarten, whispering low to every tot, there isn't any, no, there's not. The children wept all Christmas Eve, and Jabez chortled up his sleeve. No infant dared hang up his stocking for fear of Jabez' ribald mocking. He sprawled on his untidy bed, fresh malice dancing in his head, when presently, with scalp a-tingling, Jabez heard a distant jingling. He heard the crunch of sleigh and hoof, crisply a-lightning on the roof. What good to rise and bar the door? A shower of soot was on the floor. What was beheld by Jabez Dawes? The fireplace, full of Santa Claus. Then Jabez fell upon his knees, with cries of, don't, and pretty please. He howled, I don't know where you read it, but anyhow, I never said it. Jabez, replied the angry saint, it isn't I, it's you that ain't. Although there is a Santa Claus, there isn't any Jabez Dawes. Said Jabez then with impudent vim, oh yes there is, and I am him. Your magic don't scare me, it doesn't. And suddenly he found he wasn't. From grimy feet to grimy locks, Jabez became a jack-in-the-box, an ugly toy with springs unsprung, forever sticking out his tongue. The neighbors heard his mournful squeal. They searched for him, but not with zeal. No trace was found of Jabez Dawes, which led to thunderous applause, and people drank a loving cup and went and hung their stockings up. All you who sneer at Santa Claus, beware the fate of Jabez Dawes, the saucy boy who mocked the saint. Donder and Blitzen licked off his paint. Our next story, let me get to it, is called Little Orphan Annie by James Whitcomb Riley. Little orphan Annies come to our house to stay, and wash the cups and saucers up, and brush the crumbs away, and shoo the chickens off the porch, and dust the hearth, and sweep, and make the fire, and bake the bread, and earn her board and keep. And all us other children, when the supper things are done, we sit around the kitchen fire and has a lot of fun, a-listening to the witch tales that Annie tells about, and the goblins that get you, if you don't watch out. Once there was a little boy who wouldn't say his prayers, and he went to bed at night away upstairs. His mommy heard him holler and his daddy heard him bawl, and when they turned the covers down, he wasn't there at all. And they seeked him in the rafter room, and the cubby hole in the press, and they seeked him up the chimney flue and everywhere, I guess, but all they ever found were just his pants and roundabout. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And one time a little girl would always laugh and grin and make fun of everyone and all her blood and kin. And once when there was company and old folks were there, she mocked them and she shocked them and she said she didn't care. And just as she kicked her heels and turned to run and hide, there were two great big black things standing at her side, and they snatched her through the ceiling before she knew what she was about. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And little Orphan Annie says, when the blaze is blue, and the lamp wick splutters, and the wind goes ooh, and you hear the crickets quit, and the moon is gray, and the lightning bugs and dew are all squenched away, you'd better mind your parents and your teachers, fond and dear, and cherish them that love you, and dry the orphan's tear, and help the poor and needy ones that cluster all about, or the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Next, we have something from William Schwenk Gilbert, better known as W.S. Gilbert, who is actually half of the great opera duo Gilbert and Sullivan. And this one is called Nightmare. When you're lying awake with a dismal headache and repose is tabooed by anxiety, I conceive you may use any language you choose to indulge in without impropriety. For your brain is on fire, the bedclothes conspire of usual slumber to plunder you. First your counterpane goes and uncovers your toes, and your sheet slips demurely from under you. Then the blanketing tickles, you feel like mixed pickles, so terribly sharp is the pricking, and you're hot and you're cross, and you tumble and toss until there's nothing twixt you and the ticking. Then the bedclothes all creep to the ground in a heap, and you pick 'em all up in a tangle. Next your pillow resigns and politely declines to remain at its usual angle. Well, you get some repose in the form of a doze, with hot eyeballs and head ever aching, but your slumbering teems with such horrible dreams that you'd very much better be waking. For your dreams you are crossing the channel and tossing about in a steamer from Harwich, which is something between a large bathing machine and a very small second-class carriage. And you're giving a treat, penny ice and cold meat, to a party of friends and relations. They're a ravenous horde, and they all come on board at Sloane Square and South Kensington stations. And bound on that journey, you find your attorney, who started that morning from Devon. He's a bit undersized, and you don't feel surprised when he tells you he's only 11. When you're driving like mad with this singular lad, by the by, the ship is now a four-wheeler, and you're playing round games and he calls you bad names when you tell him that ties pay the dealer. But this you can't stand as you throw up your hand and you find you're as cold as an icicle in your shirt and your socks, the black silk with gold clocks, crossing Salisbury Plain on a bicycle. And he and the crew are on bicycles too, which they've somehow or other invested in. And he's telling the tars all the particulars of a company he's invested in. It's a scheme of devices to get at low prices all goods from cough mixtures to cables, which tickled the sailors by treating retailers as though they were all vegetables. You get a good spadesman to plant a small tradesman. First take off his boots with a boot tree, and his legs will take root, and his fingers will shoot, and they'll blossom and bud like a fruit tree. From the greengrocer tree you get grapes and green pea, cauliflower, pineapple, and cranberries, while the pastry cook plant cherry brandy will grant apple puffs and 3 corners and banberries. The shares are a penny, and ever so many are taken by Rothschild and Baring, and just as a few are allotted to you, you awake with a shudder despairing. You're a regular wreck with a crick in your neck, and no wonder you snore, for your head's on the floor, and you've needles and pins from your soles to your shins, and your flesh is a creep from your left leg's asleep, and you've a cramp in your toes, and a fly on your nose, and some fluff in your lungs, and a feverish tongue, and a thirst that's intense, and a general sense that you haven't been sleeping in clover. But the darkness has passed, and it's daylight at last, and the night has been long, ditto, ditto, this song, and thank goodness, they're both of them over. Our next piece is something you may have heard before by the great Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, and it is called The Walrus and the Carpenter. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be. The sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If this were only cleared away," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose," the walrus said, "that they could get it clear?" "I doubt it," said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4, to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing but, "The butter spread too thick." "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. We're now going to move into some poems that are a little bit of a darker nature, a little bit more scary. This is one of my favorite, and it's by Ogden Nash, whom we heard from before, and it is called A Tale of the 13th Floor. The hands of the clock were reaching high in an old midtown hotel. I name no name, but its sordid fame is table talk in hell. I name no name, but hell's own flame illumes the lobby garish, a gilded snare just off Times Square for the virgins of the parish. The revolving door swept the grimy floor like a crinoline grotesque, and a lowly bum from an ancient slum crept furtively past the desk. His footsteps sift into the lift as a knife in the sheath is slipped, stealthy and swift into the lift as a vampire into a crypt. Old Maxie, the elevator boy, was reading an ode by Shelley, but he dropped the ode as it were a toad when the gun jammed into his belly. There came a whisper as soft as mud in the bed of an old canal. "Take me up to the suite of Pinball Pete, the rat who betrayed my gal." The lift doth rise with groans and sighs, like a duchess for the waltz. Then in middle shaft, like a duchess daft, it changes its mind and halts. The bum bites lip as the landlocked ship doth neither fall nor rise, but Maxie, the elevator boy, regards him with burning eyes. First, to explore the 13th floor, says Maxie, would be wise. Quoth the bum, there is moss on your double cross. I have been this way before. I have cased the joint at every point, and there is no 13th floor. The architect, he skipped direct from 12 unto 14. There is 12 below and 14 above, and nothing in between. For the vermin who dwell in this hotel could never abide 13. Said Max, 13, that floor obscene, is hidden from human sight. But once a year it doth appear on this Walpurgis night. Ere you peril your soul in a murderer's role, heed those who sinned of yore. The path they trod led away from God, and on to the 13th floor, where those they slew, a grisly crew, reproach them forevermore. We are higher than 12 and below 14, said Maxie to the bum, and the sickening draught that taints the shaft is a whiff of kingdom come. The sickening draught that taints the shaft blows through the devil's door, and he squashed the latch like a fungus patch and revealed the 13th floor. It was cheap cigars, like lurid scars, that glowed in rancid gloom. The murk was aboil with fusel oil and the reek of stale perfume. And round there dragged and wound a loathsome conga chain, the square and the hep in a slow lockstep, the slayers and the slain. For the souls of the victims ascend on high, but their bodies below remain. The clean souls fly to their home in the sky, but their bodies remain below, to pursue the Cains who emptied their veins and harry them to and fro. When life is extinct, each corpse is linked to its gibbering murderer, as a chicken is bound with a wire around the neck of a killer cur. Handcuffed to hate comes Dr. Waite. He tastes the poison now. And Ruth and Judd and a head of blood with horns upon its brow. Up sashays Nan with her feathery fan from Floridora bright. She never hung for Caesar Young, but she's dancing with him tonight. Here's the bulging hip and the foam-flecked lip of the mad dog Vincent Call, and over there that ill-met pair, Becker and Rosenthal. Here's Legs and Dutch and a dozen such of braggarts, bullies, and brutes, and each one bends beneath the weight of friends who are wearing concrete boots. Now the damned make way for the double-damned, who emerge with a shuffling pace from the nightmare zone of persons unknown, with neither name nor face. And poor Dot King to one doth cling, joined in a ghastly jig, while Elwell doth jape at a goblin shape and tickle it with his wig. See Rothstein pass like a breath on glass, the original Black Sox Kid. He riffles the pack, riding piggyback on the killer whose name he hid. And smeared like brine on a slavering swine, Star Faithful, once so fair, drawn from the sea to her debauchee, with the salt sand still in her hair. And still they come, and from the bum the icy sweat doth spray. His white lips scream as in a dream, for God's sake, let's away! If I ever meet with Pinball Pete, I will not seek his gore, lest a treadmill grim I must trudge with him on this hideous 13th floor. For you I rejoice, said Maxie's voice, and I bid you go in peace. But I am late for a dancing date that nevermore will cease. So remember, friend, as your way you wend, that it would have happened to you, but I turned the heat on Pinball Pete. You see, I had a daughter too. The bum reached out, and he tried to shout, but the door in his face was slammed, and silent as stone, he rode down alone from the floor of the Double Damned. Our last poem for this special Halloween edition is one we couldn't get through October without, and that is The Raven by by Edgar Allen Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with my mane of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing a bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." And then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from my memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff the kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me, truly I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Eden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of the lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, and quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.